Well, hello guys. Welcome to D&D Friday. This is Noob DM Ariel coming back to you from beautiful Northern California. And as you might guess by the background for this video, today I want to talk about the new book, the new DMB book, um, uh, Critical Role's Call of the Netherdeep. It's a new adventure D&D book, the newest one that's been put out for 5e and Wizards of the Coast. And this book's only been out a couple of days here in the U.S. I had to pre-order. I wanted to pre-order it from our game store in the area because I was afraid that it might sell out or might be delayed in shipping because of COVID, or sell out as soon as they got some copies because Critical Role is such a huge, monumental, monolith influence for D&D, especially fifth edition nowadays. And let's face it, if you don't believe that, then you can take a look at the sales numbers, and you can take a look at the ratings on their um, live stream that happens every Thursday, which is off the charts. And I have to be fair and give a Critical Role, even though I've said this before in this channel. I'm not really a huge fan of Critical Role. Um, I've given this live stream a try. I haven't looked at the animated one. Maybe I'll take a look at that if I can get somebody's um, account, borrow somebody's account for Amazon, because I do not want to give my money to Amazon for my own personal reasons. But yeah, it's quite the phenomenon, and although it's not for me, but I do know that a lot of people like it, and if you're a fan, then more power to you. I'm not really here to discuss the ins and outs or the pros and cons of the live stream, but rather um, to say that I am a big fan of world building, and I think I've said this before too in this channel that um, I think Matthew Mercer is a great DM, and I think he's very skilled at world building, and that's something I really like. Uh, it's really an impressive feat to have create a world from scratch like he did with his setting for the Critical Role campaigns on the interwebs, on the internet, and especially uh, the uh, the continent, or the setting, the campaign setting of Exandria. I did pick up Adventurer's Guide to Wildmount, which was the first Critical Role campaign setting book that they put out, and I thought it was great. A lot of information, some really good setting specific um, world elements that you can also export and use in your other campaign, fifth edition campaigns if you want. So I thought what we would do today is I had planned to um, record or get a video up regarding some of the five edition supplement books that I picked up over the years. Really over the last couple of years since COVID, because that's how long I've been playing 5e. Primarily, I was playing fourth edition and other editions before that, and uh, I got all of the core books, including the Volo's Guide and the Tasha's Guide to Everything, pretty much all the core books, which I believe there are about eight of them. And I started picking up some of the campaign books that I liked. I only really picked up a couple, maybe two or three of the published adventures. One of them being the very first one, which was the Horde of the Dragon Queen, of the Tyranny of Dragons, because I never picked it up originally, and I wanted to see what it was like. I didn't know that because it was one of the first ones. It wasn't very well received at the time for Wizards of the Coast, but that's okay. It's got a little bit of a nostalgia um, element to it for me, because I remember it being on the shelves when I was still playing fourth, and when our DM was making the transition to fifth edition games. So but in terms of that, I think I'll just save that for a later time and talk specifically, hone in on Call of the Netherdeep, because it's kind of like I just got it, and I don't really know what's be, between the covers. So I thought, maybe I will explore it a little bit and share it with you guys, and we can sort of dive into it together. So, and then I'll probably record and add some footage of the actual artwork and pages so that you guys can take a quick look at what the art. It's got some gorgeous art, like always. These books are expensive, but they're really worth picking up if you if you budget for just um, a source book and like an adventure. A lot of the adventure books I think are really well done too. If you don't have the time to come up with your own homebrew, or if you just want a quick reference to subclasses and stuff like that. So, without further ado, let's take a look at the contents. The very first thing they do is they introduce you to the world of Exandria, which is this. If you watch the Critical Role show, you know that Exandria is where this is set. Um, on the cover, they have an illustration of five adventurers, like of party members who are trying to release the Apotheon. I think that's how you say it, the Apotheon. Um, he's a forgotten hero of Alexandria from prison. Um, and then on the back cover, there's a slithering bloodfin hunting in the sunken abyss known as the Netherdeep. The Netherdeep is like the abyss in this world. And then it talks about, I don't know how much of the introduction repeats some of the information from the Alexandria book. I'll have to compare and contrast later because it does talk about the world. In case you're not familiar with it, it talks about the calamity. The calamity is like something that's kind of like a central focus in the Critical Role campaigns, and especially in this world of Alexandria. Um, it was basically a cataclysmic war among the gods and mortals, which occurred centuries ago, and the war ended when the prime deities locked their evil brethren and themselves behind a divine gate that prevents the gods from directly interfering with the affairs of the mortals. So, you got your gods and your deities, which is standard, not really out of the norm fantasy tropes. Um, the gods here can still bestow power upon their faithful and send powerful supernatural beings to help enact their will, but they can't directly touch the mortal works of Alexandria. So it talks about that. Then it goes into the different I guess, parts of the world, like Zorahas, which is on the continent of Wildmount. And then it talks about Jigo, which is a coastal town in the northern part of the continent, which is populated mostly by goblins and by orcs, and some drow. Um, and then he goes to describe Bagzogzan, Kale Moro, and the Netherdeep itself. The Netherdeep, in particular, is a realm of despair. It was created when the spear of Grumsh um, pierced through the material plane and into the elemental plane of water. It is described by the book as an extraplanar labyrinth of um, lightless trenches, and it is infused with the distorted emotions of a demigod who is both the Netherdeep's prisoner and jailer. So, chapter six describes in full detail. Chapter six of this book describes in full detail what that region's all about. So, from what I'm looking at, they don't repeat too much information, which is good. I think they assume that by this point, this is the first campaign set in this world of Alexandria. But they figured, if you're exploring it, you probably went through the Wild Mount Adventure. That book was really great because, in addition to the setting and maps and all the information that you need, they also gave you like a couple of adventures as part of the index, or I think one of the chapters. So they're like, here is this world, here are the tools, and go ahead and and have fun and try it out. So I really liked it, that because for the price, again, these books are not completely cheap, but for the price you get a lot of bang for the buck, as they say in the Alexandria, and I'm hoping that this Call of the Netherdeep is the same way. Then it gives you a story overview, which is nice. This book does something that Wizards of the Coast did with another adventure book that I picked up. I think the first one that I picked up actually, which it was the um never it's set in Neverwinter setting. um I forgot the name of it, but it's like it's kind of like a dungeon book set in Faerun or Neverwinter. And it has a it's only for like lower level characters. I think it goes up to 5, but it has an adventure flowchart where it gives you a flowchart of delineating what each chapter is about, and what level the characters can participate in the specific chapter, and what they'll find within the pages of that pre-written adventure, which I think is really great. I think all of them should do this because it's a really good way to just index what's within the context of the covers, and you can just, if you have a bunch of seventh level characters, for example, then they can just go in this book, which does the same thing. You can just go to that adventure flowchart and send them to chapter 4, and it'll be level appropriate for that. Because a lot of DMs I've noticed on 5e don't really start characters at level 1. Sometimes they start at level 3 because they want to pick right up in an adventure, or they wanted to have some trained skills, that type of thing. Their backgrounds are more suited to a higher level, which is fine. Because the thing is, for me, at least in my experience, all of the 5e characters are pretty powerful to begin with. If anything, I would nerf some of the encounter difficulties. I would throw some monsters or some challenges to them in combat that would be a, a, a slightly higher in terms of the what do you call it, the difficulty, which they call what's the term that they use for 5th edition? It's called CR. So I would definitely play around with the CR and with the encounter levels so that it would make it a little bit more challenging, because some of the spellcasters are really OP, but that's another discussion. My opinion. So and then at the end of that first chapter, you got a fairly lengthy description, couple of pages worth of some of the NPCs that the characters will encounter, which is really nice, really well detailed with really good illustrations. Um, you got a pronunciation guide, which is great. Like, how do you pronounce some of these names for some of these gods and some of these characters? Jiguo. I mean, it doesn't really take away too much from game mechanics, but it's nice for everybody to be on the same page. So they have a whole guide of pronunciations, and that's where it ends. That's just the intro, and then you go into chapter 1, which is called a fateful competition, and then it tells you how to, if you're a DM, how to run the chapter, which is split in 2 parts: the Festival of Merit and the Emerald Grotto. Each of these parts can be played in a single 3 to 4 hour session, which is good. So you can split it up into different parts. And it's got some really nice map describing Jigo within scale. Now you get into the first chapter of adventure, and different maps for the regions, which is they did this in the Alexandria book as well, which I like. Throw on my glasses because it's getting kind of blurry. The light's changing a little bit. Well, chapter 1 seems like it's basically adventuring. Chapter 2 is another chapter with heroic quests, and it kind of continues the adventure, what happens after the festival. Um, Characters go on the road to Back Zogzan. To reach Back Zogzan, it says the characters has to follow an emerald loop south before turning east on the hollowed path. And they show a map. So, oh wow, it's a gorgeous map. One of the things about these books is I really like the cartography. They really use some really good illustrated cartography and some really good map making that adds to the aesthetic of the world building. And they have this whole map detailing the Emerald Gulch and Dorgzas, and the area, which is up to scale within 200 miles. Like each little square on the map represents 200 miles. So it's a vast territory. And I'll probably record some separate footage so you guys can see what I'm talking about. But it's a fantastic map. Just these maps alone are worth picking up the adventure, I think, because they do such a good job of immersion. That's the term that's used in gaming all the time. So you can get immersed not only in the adventure but immersed in the world. Um, yeah, so that chapter is all kind of traveling to Bagzogzan, and then chapter 3 it talks about how do what happens when you get to Bagzogzan, um, and it gives you some NPCs, um, and some encounter tables. 5e is very big on encounter tables. So, for example, here in this chapter, the chapter 3 that talks about the Bazogzan area, it gives you a D10 table where you can roll a D10, and then depending on what you roll, you'll get one of the encounters. Like, for example, a 6 would give you a neutral good bugbear fixes the wheelchair of a lawful neutral drow veteran who has lost a leg. So it's always different, and it's fun because a lot of these encounters are narrative based as well. It's not always combat. It gets kind of boring if it's just combat after combat. And some of these things are broken up with some really good role play and some really good narrative um, segments. It's kind of like some people don't like some of these pre-made fifth edition adventures. I've heard them described by some people as sort of like choose your own adventure books. If you guys are old enough to remember those, where you know if you do this, then you follow this path. But if you do something else, then you go somewhere else. And it really depends on the. It's still kind of an adventure that's all guided and on rails a little bit. But I think if you have time and you have a creative enough DM or game master, that shouldn't be a problem because you can deviate from some of the. There's so much choice, but if that choice is not enough for you, you can deviate and just kind of do whatever you want and change some of the scenarios around to fit whatever narrative you're trying to create for your players, which I like. Um, the art is just incredible, like always. Um, so chapter 4 goes into is called the Jewel of Hope. The gloom of Baxonan gives way to the sunlight and warm winds of Marquet as the characters arrive in the metropolis of Ank'Harel. When I was trying to watch the Critical Role Street, they did talk about Marquet a lot. I think it's a well-known, famous location within the Critical Role milieu, world, universe, whatever you want to call it. Um, and they do such a great job also of detailing the areas. For example, Anchorel at a glance. This is on page 81 of the book, and it talks in the same chapter, and it talks about Anchorel. Basically, it gives you a map of the place, but it also describes it very in depth. It has a population of over 293,000. Predominantly, you'll find humans, orcs, and elves. It tells you who the leader is of the area. In this case, is a character named John Ord, who's a lawful neutral ancient brass dragon. And it tells you the laws and the religion and the neighborhoods and the geography. And if that's not enough, as if that wasn't enough, your characters are running around and they need to have a rest from their adventuring day, so they need some lodging, and it gives you a table with examples of lodges that are available in the city. It's really good stuff. And of course, one of the things I like about these 5e books too is that they give you so much flavor text and so much description that you can use in your games, in your adventures, in your campaign settings about the different sub races, beyond what is available in the player's handbook and beyond what's available in some of the other supplements. For example, the Goliaths. I used to be in a campaign for fourth edition, and one of the players played a Goliath. They haven't changed too much in the new edition, and I think they were first introduced. I forget what book they first introduced. I'd have to look it up. But the Goliaths of Alexandria, for example, um, it tells you how it's specific to the setting. So it talks about um, they're mountain born people like the other Goliaths in the universe, but it tells you what their specific skills are, what their backgrounds are, what their proficiencies are, what their traits are, specific to this adventure setting, which is really fantastic. Again, a lot of detail, um, a lot of detail on not only on the geography, not only on the setting, but also on the different sub races that you can play beyond the sub races that you already know. Here we have another, there's another flow chart, but this one is called a story track, and it gives you like the different missions that the characters can go on in the adventure. For example, there's a mission to deliver a figurine. Characters have to retrieve a figurine from the Bone Garden, a shop in the Songsu Bazaar, and deliver it safely to the Crystal Chateau. And then the second mission that they go on is search the Life Dome. Characters have to travel to the River District and search the Life Dome for a possible secret entrance into Cal Morau, which is another area of the continent. So, and then it detail a whole bunch of other missions that they can do. So it is an actual kind of a blend. The book is kind of like a blend between not only just the campaign setting, if you're not familiar with Alexandria, but also, um, you know, what you can do in the world. So send your PCs on different missions. If you're a player, of course, you're just participating in whatever you mission your DM has prepared for you. Obviously, um, there's another flowchart about gambits, which is sort of the consortium story track. So it's basically more missions for that specific area of the map of the book, and they're really well detailed. They're just going to what the missions are, what the area looks like, what the demographics are, what the maps are. Chapter 5 of the book is The Drowned City, and this really caught my eye when I was rifling through it in the bookstore or the hobby store because the art is just eye popping, and then it talks about the different developments between rival races in the world. Um, there's an aboleth location, for example. I think I'm saying that right. Aboleth. They're sort of like been around forever since like first edition or second edition or even earlier, and they're everybody knows that these are creatures that are under the sea that are like marine based, and there's a whole description of there's a table where you can roll about which location for the aboleth location that you want to explore. Um, and there's a whole bunch of NPCs. There's a bunch of monsters that you can encounter with their specific stat blocks, and then we get to chapter 6, which describes the Netherdeep, which is the titular or the title of the book, obviously, Call of the Netherdeep, and it tells you how to run the chapter in Netherdeep. It tells you a whole overview of Netherdeep area again, and it has details on the fragments of suffering. To enter the heart of despair, where the apotheon is imprisoned, a creature must have absorbed at least one fragment of suffering, a tangible representation of an emotion felt by the apotheon. So you got this god that you're trying to rescue, and then the characters have to, or the PCs actually have to roll on the fragment suffering table, and whatever they get, you'll get a fragment of melancholy or a fragment of loathing, some kind of emotion, a fragment of despondence, a fragment of pity, and they act according to that. Um, and you have a bunch of lore, bunch of information on the lore and the regions, more maps, more great artwork, um, more descriptions on the characters and the NPCs with art corresponding artwork. and information about the treasure that your Perry will receive. I'm assuming if they survive the adventure, or depending on how far they get into it. Um, and that's chapter 6, and that kind of the whole book is kind of like that. Follows that format. There's a bunch of new creatures, monsters, creatures that they can challenge, and their stat blocks with corresponding skills and abilities. And then the appendix, there's one appendix in the back that's all about the creatures. So Appendix A is all about creatures. And this follows kind of the same format of most of the campaign books that I've read, or the adventure books that I've read, except there's a lot of them in this one. Um, it'll be interesting to go through the Exandria book, which I also own, the first book, and sort of go through and see if they repeat. Because I'm noticing that there's a creature called the horizon back turtle, the tortoise, the horizon back tortoise. I don't know how to say that word, but basically like a big turtle, and it has like sort of a kind of like a thing on its hump. It looks like a house in its hump. Um, but I remember this creature was in the Exandria book too, so I don't know how many of those are repeated. Doesn't look like too many, um, from what I can see. So that's the first Appendix A. Is that the only appendix in the book? No. Appendix B is magic items. So you get magic items, you got your casters, you go on adventures, and you can pick up some magic items. It's not as detailed or as long as the first appendix on the monsters, but that's okay. Um, and then Appendix C, as in cat, it's the medals of merit. So you can get awarded medals. How about that? That's like the end of Star Wars, man, when they have like the heroes are Leia's giving them medals. So you got that. Um, and then there's Appendix E, which is more like concept art. Some of the artwork that's found in the book, how they put that together. And there's a map, at a complete adventure map that you can pull out your table. I'm not going to do that right now because I don't want to tear it. But I think the Alexandra book also came with a map. I'm pretty sure. But there's a huge map, and you could put it on your wall if you want to use it as a decoration, or if you're using it, most likely you're going to be using it in your campaign if you're using minis, and going that route. So that's pretty much the book. Call it the Netherdeep. It retails for $49.95 US. Kind of an expensive book, but you get a lot in for your money. You can get it online, and I'm sure that if you get it online, you can probably get a rebate, and it's get it cheaper. It's over 200 pages of material, which is it's thick, it's meaty. I heard some discussion and some criticism of people that bought materials in the early campaigns or the early phases of fifth edition, where a lot of the supplements were they were not heavy, they were not meaty. You didn't get as much for you didn't feel like you got the bang for your buck that you should really get with this type of pre-made homebrew or pre-written rather adventures that you can incorporate or just run straight from the printed material. But this one is not one of them. This one is quite lengthy, quite detailed, and it rivals the Wildmount one, which is why I picked this book up, because I really like the Wildmount one. Was the same thing, very in depth, a lot of description. Matthew Mercer should be commended, I think, because he does a fantastic job. He's one of my favorite world builders here. And I think next video, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to go through some of the supplements for 5e that I do own, other than the source books, so that people can. So I want to give my justification for why I picked some of those books, and a lot of it is a personal choice. I remember Bob the World Builder, or Bob the Builder rather. If you're familiar with his YouTube channel, if you're not, I'm going to put a link to it on the description where he talks about, or he has a whole video about which 5e books he bought and which ones you think are optional and you don't need to buy, only unless you want to. And I think that's very useful information. A lot of it is subjective, of course. Of course, if you're like you know a frozen tundra world, you're gonna like the book on the Icewind Dale region. If you like to deal with the devils and you like the demons and the creatures of the nine hells, then you're gonna pick up the Avernus adventure book. So it's really quite subjective in some areas. For me, for example, I was kind of turned off by the Ravenloft book because Gothic horror is cool, but when I think of D&D, I think more of you know um, sword and sword and sorcery and high fantasy type concepts, and that's where I grew up. And even though second edition did have some really good Ravenloft uh, modules. Everybody was for a while. They say it's the best. I've never really played or run. No, I never played it actually, to be honest. And you know, it probably is good, but I went ahead and I picked up the campaign book instead because the campaign book details, um, how to run adventures in the different segments of Ravenloft and that whole gothic horror scenario. So it's not necessarily an adventure book like the Curse of Strahd. That's what it's called, the Ravenloft Curse of Strahd. And everybody and their mother was running Curse of Strahd for a while, and it just turned me off. I was like, can I play something different? I mean, I'm sure it's fun, but can I do something? I always want to do something slightly different than what the masses are doing. So, and here I am talking about Critical Role, which is, exactly what the masses are watching and keeping an eye on. But like I said, to open up the intro of this video, and I'm gonna have to close it now because it's gonna get entirely too long. But like I said in the beginning, Critical Role is such a, whether you hate it or like it or are not a fan, not a huge fan like myself, you cannot deny the influence it has had in promoting fifth edition, promoting the Dungeons and Dragons, the current rule set, and promoting getting more people into the hobby, which I think ultimately it's always a good thing versus not having enough people to play with or not having enough people that are interested that you can share your passion with on a regular basis. So that's it for me, guys. I hope you enjoyed this look at rather rudimentary and rather definitely not in depth, but sort of a cursory look at Call of the Netherdeep, the latest fifth edition Dungeons and Dragons pre-made adventure that you can purchase online or at brick and mortar stores um, by Matthew Mercer and the teams over at Wizards of the Coast. It's probably the last D&D book I'm going to buy for a while because um, there's not that many left. I think I have pretty much all the core books, and a lot of the other adventures. There's a reason why I never picked them up, other than financial reasons, and I will talk about that next time. So thank you for tuning in. If you like this content, go ahead and hit the like or subscribe. And if you want to help out my channel economically, you don't have to. It's totally up to you. But I do have a Patreon set up now, so you can find a link to that also on this channel description. So until next time, this is Ariel signing off.